Yeah, well, that takes too long. Don't we have to start in like 5 minutes?
Yeah. So my bird sound, Brad, or aviary, I guess maybe aviary is a better term, because I went 2 nights ago. I went out late for a late run. And as I'm running down the street here, I hear these sounds I haven't heard before. Turns out it's a great horned owl.
Oh, really?
And so it's dark, it's 9 o'clock, and I hear these screeches coming from one of these really, maybe a 40-foot cypress, and these screeches coming from this thing perched up on top. And as I come by there, as I'm running by, I think, what the heck is that? Because the screeches are all these different sounds. They're different, like every time, like 5 or 6 different kind of screeches, and they're weird. And then I hear the hoot of the owl. I said, oh, geez. So I just stopped, pulled up, and stood under that tree for a while to listen to this fellow communicate, whoever he was talking to.
Did you hear another one somewhere in the distance?
There was one, that was east of there. I don't know how far, but it was, there was some chatter. First time I've seen an owl out here. But yeah, it was, couldn't make out the size of it, but that was pretty wild. I had those screeches, man.
Those things are huge and they're scary. I remember my brother and a couple of friends of his were out on this dirt road, and late one night, and they saw this owl. So they shot it with an arrow, but it was like one of those blunt tip, rubber tip arrow things. I don't know
stun arrow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it kind of knocked it out. So they put it in the back of the car and they're driving. And then all of a sudden the wingspan is like, I don't know,
6-7 feet. Yeah.
Big. 6 or 7 feet. So the thing wakes up and it's in the back seat, and it puts its wings out and it starts screeching at them. And they all pulled over and bailed out of that thing faster than,
Tear your face up in a heartbeat.
Man. They were terrified. Serves them right too.
Oh, good. Gabe says we're working, and we're organized pictorially on his screen. That's looking good. So,
Brad, what's been your approach the last couple of months on COVID and the vaccine and stuff like that?
Oh,
kind of stayed off of it, or have you talked about prevention, building the immune system? I think that's very salient. I was telling Stan and Brian that probably 80% plus are women that will probably be on. They're the caregivers. They're the drivers of the medical and emotional health of the family.
Yeah.
I think that's probably accurate, don't you think?
I think that's probably right. Yep.
So that,
if not even higher.
But I think, I actually said 90 myself, but I think talking about supporting the immune system, whether you're vaxxed or not vaxxed, whether you're this or that, all these things are really important. We can talk about the damage of what the spike protein is from, the infection if we want. Because this
and how it attacks the endothelial layer. Yeah, for sure. I got a list of questions here that
whatever you want to ask, we're good.
Yeah, you have some initial talking points.
Let's see. The other thing we could talk about is we have some really highly credible people from the Emotion Code that have had great success with Cardio Miracle. So we can kind of drop those names. I thought we'd talk a little bit about Bruce, your brother, and Lana. I mean, every time they get down to their last few scoops, Bruce starts fidgeting and trying to walk across Flathead Lake naked to get to his Cardio Miracle.
I don't know if we should talk about that or not.
So is that when it's frozen, or he can walk on water?
No, he can walk on water. He does all kinds of stuff. His brother is the miracle man of Three Forks. So,
yeah, that's true. That was really an amazing, really amazing. So yeah, I mean, how long do you guys want to be doing this? What do you think?
50 minutes, or until we get bored, until they get bored.
45 minutes in Q&A.
Yeah, okay. We're holding people for 95% through the times. We've had really good success with holding people on there, but I think the main thing, what worked the best with Dr. Northrup was the interpersonal reactions back and forth and being totally casual as far as, the conversation. It was just very compelling. And you're so beloved and respected by your clientele, your customers, that's the thing that makes the biggest difference is your input in the process, not just us. So
yeah, absolutely right. Sure. So let's do this.
All right,
is it time?
About to let everyone in. So
gonna do the intro music.
T-minus 5, 4.
Give everybody a minute to join us. We could have a dance.
Brad's got rhythm.
All right, cool. Well, great. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I'm going to let these gentlemen introduce themselves because they know more about their lives than I do. But I want to thank you all for being here. I think this is going to be interesting for you. This is a very timely topic. We're going to be talking about a very, very important molecule in the body. So first of all, John Hewlett, John and I go back about, what do you think? Maybe 5.5, 6 years, probably, huh, John?
Seems like a lot longer than that. We've gone through a lot together.
Yeah, we have. We really have. We could probably write a book between the two of us.
Absolutely.
And John's the creator of the nutritional supplement that we're going to be talking about tonight. And John, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll let you introduce Stan. And Stan, you can introduce Brian, and off we go.
Sounds great. Well, Brad, it's Dr. Brad. It's always a pleasure to share the screen, share a sandwich, or share a good laugh, or a concern about the future of our country with a fellow patriot. I don't know that there's anything philosophically that you and I disagree on. That's what's made our friendship so compelling. I know that Janet and I view you and Gene as our dearest of friends, and we've been so grateful for those 6 years. If we could encapsulize the last 6 years, 8 years that Jan and I have been together, that relationship with the Nelsons takes top billing. But, I've had the privilege of being able to speak at, or at least talk about Cardio Miracle nitric oxide at a number of your live events in Las Vegas, Park City, et cetera. And we miss those. We'd like to do those again. We've had some great experiences. In fact, one of the first ones we had my son Jason come and entertain and sing, and that was a lot of fun. And that's where so we've really grown it. And we use in our home, we use the body code, the emotion code virtually every day. Janet is a devout disciple, and we've just loved the relationships we've had with all of the people in your wonderful science and therapy that you've created. So we have the highest regards for what you've done. Great advocates of that. I was just a normal guy who was trying to make a lot of money and take care of everything in life in the financial world. And 14 years ago, had a hospital visit for an appendectomy that went bad, and that led me on a different path. And I found out after having I almost became one of those medical statistics. The third leading cause of death is medical errors and pharmaceutical drugs that are properly prescribed, not improperly, but properly prescribed, is the third leading cause of death behind cancer, or behind heart disease and cancer. So I was led to this mission of learning about how I could avoid having quadruple bypass and trying to live. And had I not gone on that path 14 years ago and found nitric oxide, I wouldn't be on this interview today, and I wouldn't have met you. I'd have been dead a decade ago. So I'm very passionate about it, as you are, about the healing that people experience with getting rid of their traumas, and even the genetic generational things that you teach and that we have a great belief in. So we've been on this for the last 7 years. We developed our own formula. We believe that it's the best formula in the world. We've tried to prove that in one of the leading scientific labs. but also we've now seen thousands and thousands of customers with amazing results. And so we try to teach them to be aware of what nitric oxide is. And we'll get into that in a minute. Last year, we were privileged to reconnect with longtime friend Stanford Graham. Stan's a world-class athlete. We're not supposed to, our good friend, Dr. Christiane Northrup says we're not supposed to tell our age anymore. We should pretend like we're ageless. But and actually, Dr. Northrup's a great, great advocate of nitric oxide, written a book on it, and talks about Cardio Miracle every day to the people. So that's one of the things for your female listeners who might be aware of her. But Stanford joined us, extensive legal, international business, has tremendous experience in organic foods and athletic performance, and he joined us. And so we've been thrilled to have him become a part of our international team as our business is flourishing now all over the world. So Stan, you can speak for yourself.
Thanks for the introduction, John. John's been a mentor of mine for over 28 years. He was a great friend of my father's. And so it's been a blessing for me to know John for over 2 decades, and he's always been a great mentor and friend to me. I'm here because I was aware of John's work with nitric oxide for the last 3 years. There was something really, a hand of God in my life that appeared to recommend that I work with John. And so within a day of that happening, I was up at John's cabin and we were talking about what was new on the Cardio Miracle on the nitric oxide front. And he presented me, Brad, with that research paper at Ohio University with Dr. Tadeusz Malinsky, who is an international specialist in vitamin D3 and nitric oxide. And he had performed a scientific study, we'll address that a little later, folks, on this specific product. And John handed me that research study as I walked in. He says, "Hey, we've got this." So I sat down with that and said goodbye to John for about 6 hours while I thumbed through that research for several hours and came back to him just kind of slack-jawed with what I'd found. Just a phenomenal, groundbreaking research. And it was at that time I said, "John, let's get serious about this relationship, because this is clearly something that people need to know about, and I want to be part of it." So I did. And then one of the next things I did is I picked up the phone and I called this really good friend of mine who he and I have been brothers of other mothers for about 6 years now. His name's Brian Ingram. Truly a kindred spirit of mine. We realized that the first time we met. We were introduced by a common friend. The three of us have been involved in a lot of international business, and we had a common friend that told each of us, "You need to meet this guy." And so that happened, and Brian and I have been very closely associated ever since. I called him and said, "You've got to try this." I've given it a couple of weeks run. Brian's he's a former professional athlete, played professional baseball, among other things. I mean, he's a bit of a Renaissance man. But I called him and said, "You're going to have to check this out," because I knew that Brian was very in tune with his body. You make a fraction of a percentage change in some performance metric, and his taxonomy changes. He gets it. So I made a phone call to Brian and said, "You got to try this out, check it out, because I'm on this team. I think you're going to be on this team with me." So, but it came just as a consequence of personal use and conviction. So, Brian, you want to?
Oh, thanks, Dan.
You're up to that.
Really appreciate it. Dr. Brad, really great to be on your show this evening. As Stan mentioned, the people that are coming around Cardio Miracle right now are just all world class. And I feel personally just very honored to be working with men such as John and Stan and the rest of the cardio team. Just very quickly, as Stan mentioned, former professional athlete, I'm just going to share a quick story about my 2020. I think for many people, it was kind of a strange year, right? So as a former professional athlete, I was deciding to head back, just looked at 2020 is a unique opportunity to get back across the pond. I was on the East Coast and working in DC and New York, and decided to come back to the West Coast. The minute I hit ground, it was almost like my body, something clicked or shifted. And I don't know if it was a consequence of my flight or something that happened, but I went to bed that first night when I got to Washington State, and my blood pressure started tanking. My feet started tingling, and my energy level just over the series of a week and 2 weeks and a month just absolutely tanked. And so right around that time, I started thinking, oh my goodness, what is going on, right? As a former professional athlete, you really kind of tied to your health, and maybe a little bit of too much of your identity is tied up into your health. It was a real process for me, right, to go through that transition of evaluating myself and kind of going inwards and doing that work. But around that time, I was on the internet, and it just feels like sometimes the way that things serendipitously line up. I was researching something called the endothelium, which is something that we're going to talk about later in this presentation. And the next day, when in the middle of my research, Stan called me up in the middle of me feeling just at one of my lowest points in terms of my own personal health, I think, in my life. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't figure out, like, my head just foggy and tingling at night, and my body was kind of jolting when I was trying to fall asleep. Thinking, man, something serious is going on here. Stanford Graham calls me up and said, hey, you need to meet my former mentor. He has a product that is a nitric oxide supplement, this miracle molecule that won the Nobel Prize over a decade ago. And you got to get it, Brian. I'm going to send you some. Because we started talking. I said, hey, this is what's going on. He said, Brian, you got to get on this stuff immediately. So just to quickly wrap up, I started taking the product. And since that time, I've made literally 180 degree or a complete shift, right? The other direction. Now I'm running wind sprints. I'm getting my blood panel drawn. Things have radically transformed. And as Stan mentioned, I'm paying attention to very nuanced inputs into my body. So I'm able to differentiate the states of consciousness, the states of transference in terms of my body, right? In terms of the energetics around it and how I feel and those shifts. So to be able to identify something that had such a huge marker in my life in a positive direction, I credit right now, and I just, with the deepest gratitude to John and Stan, this product saved my life. I feel that. And to feel that type of transformation for me personally was enough for me to say, whatever I can do to help this cause, I'm all in. So that was my experience with Cardio Miracle. So for me, it's just a real thrill to be on the call, to be able to share with everyone my personal experience.
Well, that's so great, Brian. Thank you. And thank you, Stan, and thank you, John. I think you can tell from listening to these men talk, you can gather a little bit, I think, about the caliber of these men and who they are. And these are some of the greatest men that I know. And it's interesting, because I spoke recently in, where was I? It was in Austin, Texas, at Modern Nirvana, which is really a biohacking conference. And I'm hoping that next year we'll be able to get you guys to come in there and speak, because I was speaking about the work that we do, which essentially it really truly is biohacking, and this is also what you guys are doing is very, very much along those lines. It's giving the body. It's not trying to do things to the body that the body doesn't naturally want to do. It's giving something to the body that the body actually needs and wants in a very big way. So, Brian, you mentioned the endothelium, and for people that don't know what that is, let's talk a little bit about the endothelium and what it is and maybe why that's important. I think maybe people hear that word, it's out there because of COVID, but go ahead.
Oh, perfect. I think, do we have a slide presentation too that we can put up? Yeah. That really, I think, starts to lay in the framework of the endothelium. But essentially, the endothelium is something that regulates the blood. It's sort of like the computer interface, if you will, between your blood and the rest of your system. So when people talk about leaky gut, right, that's a term that gets thrown around quite a bit. It's sort of a buzzword that people are familiar with, I think, at this point. Well, the endothelium is a very, very incredibly thin, micron thin lining that regulates the blood. And so it's that interface. And over time, that endothelium starts to harden and stiffen. And as a result of that, the nitric oxide in the blood flow, the molecule that powers the blood in terms of the regulation and gives us energy and our life force, it starts to decrease as a result of the endothelium starting to harden and stiffen. And so it's just this incredible communication interface. And that illustration on the screen, I think, does a terrific job of just really the vasculature, how incredible. If it's over 400 square meters, right? That's 6 tennis courts of that little lining that makes up the whole system and it creates the incredible function within our bodies. I know that Stanford as well has some thoughts about the endothelium, because this is something that, as I was starting to dig into my own personal research, we would spend hours talking about this, right? The endothelium. And as you mentioned, Dr. Brad, this is something that more and more people are starting to hear as a result of some of the science now coming online that the endothelium is under attack. And, you know, when you start hearing terms like that being thrown around on mainstream news, and you start seeing some very, very highly regarded and respectable doctors start to talk about how the endothelium is under attack, to me, the way that my mind works is, well, what can we do to support it? How can we strengthen it? Yeah. And that's one of the key incredible differentiators with Cardio Miracle and the study with Dr. Malinsky are the findings that eventually led to him saying, hey guys, I don't know how you did this, right? John, this truly is a miracle, because I don't know if you intended for the consequence or downstream findings of what you created, but this formulation increases the nitric oxide in your body, and therefore it's supporting the endothelium. So that was a huge revelation for Dr. Malinsky, this world-renowned PhD that studies the endothelium and studies nitric oxide. Yeah.
There's this interesting intersection, Brian, great information. You know, Brad, so as Brian says, the endothelium is this inner lining of all of your blood vessels. As he said, it's a single cell thick, and it lines all of your blood vessels. In fact, all of your microcapillaries, which are a large, maybe 80% of all your blood vessels in your body, are made exclusively of endothelial cells. Now, the reason that is so critical is because there's not a cell in your body, folks, that is more than 3 nanometers away from a capillary. And those capillaries are made exclusively of endothelial cells. Endothelial cells are the cell that make nitric oxide. Our ability to produce nitric oxide, or their ability to produce nitric oxide, decreases with age because of wear and tear, because of internal, external toxins, lots of different reasons. But as our vasculature ages, its ability to produce nitric oxide decreases, which leads to things like stiffening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, strokes, heart attacks, low blood flow, low or hypoxia, the starvation of oxygen starvation of cells. And this, as Brian mentioned, this endothelium, this communication interface, it's the only cell in the body that has direct contact with your liquid organ, your blood. So all of the data, as Brian said, the reason it's the communication interface is because all of the data that's streaming that your blood is carrying, whether it's oxygen and hydration and nutrition, the only cell that has any direct interaction with all of that data is the endothelial cell. And that's the one that's creating this nitric oxide to stay healthy and to keep the interior of your blood vessels slick and to prevent adhesion of platelets and lipids and all kinds of things like that. So I want John to speak a little bit about this, but one of the things that happened last year in March of 2020, some leading doctors in Europe performed the first autopsies on COVID patient fatalities. And what they found was that those bodies were littered. That's the verb they used, were littered with dead cells. The blood vessels and microcapillaries were littered with dead cells and tiny clots. There were clots in every single organ in these bodies, which was a condition they had never seen before. So they had to hypothesize a cause because this was, COVID was new. This was March 2020. So their hypothesis was whatever this thing is, this virus, whatever it is, it's attacking the endothelium or the endothelial cells because the endothelial cells were leaky. And so as a consequence, the immune system was sending the macrophages and platelets to these places of injury of the endothelium inside the blood vessel and causing clots. So imagine, as we're seeing this happen, because we know the importance of the endothelial health and the benefit that nitric oxide could actually bring to it. Dr. Malinsky, in his medical study of this product, actually said that bathing human endothelial cells with Cardiomiracle can restore and maintain the health of the endothelium. That's in the study. And so it's that organ hypercritical because of those particular functions that it serves in the body, and the intersection of that critical function of the endothelium and the way that nitric oxide helps it maintain its health and serves to get all of the data to all the cells in our body, the nutrition and hydration and et cetera. That's its function. It's a communication interface and the supply chain. So very critical to keep those healthy, particularly under the current environment.
That's great. Thank you, Stan. Great explanation. So for our listeners who don't really, who aren't really up on this, or maybe haven't really heard about this, John, can you maybe in a nutshell explain what nitric oxide is, why it's important, why do we need it? What's it for?
Absolutely. Nitric oxide was discovered and kind of unnamed in about the 1980s. And then in the 1990s, they figured out that something was relaxing these microcapillaries, these little arteries. And they essentially named it and came up with that it was nitric oxide. And in 1998, the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology was awarded to 3 scientists who discovered from their various types of research about this molecule that somehow did all of this regulating, as we were talking about earlier. And then also the fact that it was stimulating these arteries to dilate. They were to relax, it helped relax. And then as Stanford mentioned, it helped, it's later has become learned through these literally close to now 200,000 studies in the last 25 years. It was determined that nitric oxide's involved in everything. And it was called the miracle molecule by a medical journal. It was called the spark of life in the cell by the University of Florida. I mean, even Mark Hyman, the well-known physician, wellness expert, just put out this last week talking about that there's nothing that nitric oxide doesn't do and how important it is. And so, here I've been, 14 years ago, a former financial guy, and obviously not as fit as Dr. Brad. I have a little more hair on top, but not much.
Not much.
But the reality is I've been a foot short for my weight for several decades. And so because of the reality is, so I'm not like Brian or Stan. I'm just a normal guy whose dad died at 62 of heart disease and uncle at 57 and cousin at 49. I was a walking time bomb. And now I've outlived all of them and I no longer have any medications. And when I was in my hospital visit for my botched appendectomy that almost killed me 3 times, they wanted to go from there after, all these other problems to do quadruple bypass. And I said, I'm not going to do that. So it led me on this path. But nitric oxide is this really interesting molecule that is the basis. And one of the things that Stanford said is how it impacts things. When it's such a small microcapillary, and this is the lining or the cell of that at the end of the row, that's what leads to neuropathy. It leads to macular degeneration. It leads to, heaven forbid the word, Alzheimer's, dementia. All of those things are contingent upon blood flow, oxygen, anti-inflammation. And the nitric oxide helps protect and prevent and heal those types of things. And so getting back to the raging pathogen that has changed all of our lives for the last 18 months. And I know people are so sick of hearing all the different points of view, but this is an educational thing that we feel is important. The pathogen, whether it's a bioweapon, whether it's a virus, whether it's who knows what, that's irrelevant. But what they've now found is that it creates a spike protein that attacks the endothelial lining. These little cells are essentially like having one of those things that they used to hit over people's heads in war with all the spikes around it. It's like having that running through your blood vessels, churning up and leaving havoc in its wake. And then there's other theories and people who believe that the so-called vaccine, which is actually a gene therapy, the purpose of the gene therapy is to go ahead and to try to generate spike proteins to help fight off the spike protein coming from the pathogen or from the bioweapon or the virus. So whether you've had a vaccination or an injection or whether you have not, the enemy is the spiky protein that's damaging the endothelial lining. And so one of our messages is you want to help heal your endothelium. We can't make the medical claim, the Cardio Miracle does that, but we can say that Professor Malinsky, the smartest guy in the world on nitric oxide and the endothelium, in my opinion, he proved that we extend nitric oxide from an endothelial cell for 24 to 36 hours. He proved that it helps lower that inflammatory response and it gets rid of free radicals or the damaging molecules of inflammation. So if you want to connect the dots. We can't make medical claims. We're in a world of censorship everywhere, as you well know. But to your people who believe in what you're trying to do and the wellness and the quality of life and trying to release the emotional baggage, we're really concerned about people who are having endothelial damage from either the pathogen or the bioweapon or from the concern about what may be happening when people are saying some of the side effects of having the injection seems to be a lot of bleeding. And there seems to be different things happening, inflaming the heart and the arteries and things, if you read both sides of the story. And so we're really motivated to try to help people understand that there is hope for all of us if we keep our endothelium and our microcapillaries healthy, keep our blood flowing. Because one of the first things people do if they start thinking you've got a clotting problem is what? They give you a blood thinner. Well, you and I both know from your years in the medical profession that we used to refer to blood thinners as what? Rat poison, because that's what it was. And there's the side effects are horrific. So if we can help people avoid having to worry about thinning their blood, the nitric oxide thins it naturally. I recently, and I don't know if I even had told you, but I went to New York for a treatment of a little skin issue that I've been dealing with for a while. And in the process, they did a sonogram and they did a full scan of everything, of all my fluids. And the young Russian technician came back to me and she said, "Now, how old are you?" And I told her, and she goes, "How long have you been this big size?" I said, "A long time." She goes, "Tell me why you have the best blood viscosity of anyone I've ever tested in 15 years.
There you go.
And I said, "Yeah, let me tell you about it." So.
Well, to me, if you think about it, I mean, it's really pretty simple. Imagine, however old you are now, imagine if you had the circulation that you had when you were 10 years old. Imagine how you'd feel. Imagine the energy that you'd have. And, as we get older, what happens is if we don't get enough exercise and just from the aging process, a lot of those capillaries that are way out at the fringes in our bodies start to just break down. They shut down, they flatten out. And so then you've got cells that aren't, getting as much oxygen and so on. So you get inflammation, you get all these issues going on. So, I'll tell you something else. In my family, I have a family history of aneurysms. My dad had an aneurysm. My brother had an aneurysm. My sister had an aneurysm and a stroke and so on. And so that's all about the strength of that of the endothelium and those the
arteries in the brain. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so part of the reason I'm taking is because I've got that. I have that family weakness, and I don't want to end up a statistic.
Well, and your brother, who is one of your mentors, Dr. Bruce, one of my favorite people, he had a stroke. I mean, he had a serious stroke, and I saw him after that stroke. And with your introduction and visiting with him, we put him on 4 servings a day of Cardio Miracle for the last 4 some odd years.
Yeah.
And though his hearing has not returned, even though that was a different issue from the stroke, his hearing suffers a little bit. It's been amazing, his recovery. And most of your listeners are well aware of your wonderful sister-in-law, Lana Nelson. And Lana and Bruce literally text us. They texted us yesterday and say, we think of you and Janet twice a day as we drink our Cardio Miracle. And thank you for helping us save Bruce's life and allowing me to continue to take care of my wonderful patients and people that Lana serves from their home in Big Fork, Montana. So that's been one of the more gratifying experiences. Is Bruce is a character. He's one of the funniest guys ever, but it's been so wonderful to have contributed a little bit to the quality of life for both Bruce and Lana that would have been totally different had he not seen the benefits of enhancing his nitric oxide.
Yeah, it's really a miracle that he's still here. Doctors who look through his records just tell him, you really shouldn't be here. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
How is this possible?
Brad, Brad and John, you talk about miracles. Brian mentioned it as well. The name of the product is Cardio Miracle, the real miracle. Brad, you mentioned this at the beginning, at the top of the webinars, that the miracle is the body.
Yeah.
Our bodies are miraculous. And when we say this is a nitric oxide supplement, it's not that you get a bottle of nitric oxide. And we don't sell bottles of gas, because nitric oxide's a gas. Well, when your body receives a proper fuel, when it receives a proper input, then on its own, it produces nitric oxide.
Yeah.
And the benefit that Dr. Malinsky, what stunned him, again, was the fact that when John says that there was a 24 to 36 hour expression of nitric oxide production from human endothelial cells, that kind of long duration or long-term production of nitric oxides was 6 to 8 times longer than anything Dr. Malinsky had ever seen. So we're not talking about 3 hours or 4 hours. We're talking 6 to 8 times that amount of time for the production of nitric oxide. There are several studies we can share with your audience that have expressly found that only long-term production of bioavailable nitric oxide provides the physiological and biological health benefits that we've been talking about. There are studies that have identified short-term expression nitric oxide production, say for it's 3 to 4 hours in high-performance athletes. Now, why it can help enhance performance in the short term with spikes in production, there was a finding of 0 benefit on the physiological, biological results from that short-term biological expression of nitric oxide. It must be long-term expression to receive these benefits. And to simplify it again, Brad, you made a good point to bring things down to a very simple analysis. And I would add this, that of all the chronic inflammation diseases or chronic inflammatory diseases that kill over 70% of the people that die every year in America. Right, so every year in America, over 70% of the people that die as a consequence of chronic inflammatory disease, whether it's diabetes or Parkinson's or cancer or rheumatoid arthritis. All those inflammatory diseases have three common denominators. They share three common denominators. One is low blood flow. Second is low blood pressure. And the third is hypoxia. And so we hear that the term that we use, that blood is life, for a business, when we say something is the lifeblood of the business or the lifeblood of the family or the lifeblood, well, blood is life. And so where our blood viscosity, for instance, where our blood is sluggish and slow moving, where our blood vessels are encumbered or obstructed with all kinds of speed bumps or, accumulations of material along the sides so that we don't have a nice luminal flow of blood, like a water slide. It's, that, as you mentioned, the capillaries, our blood system, that irrigation supply, as it were, that information supply through these microcapillaries, out toward the periphery. And this happens in every organ. If those start shutting down, then the performance of every organ in your body is compromised. So we're talking pulmonary, cardiovascular, liver, kidneys, because your vision, those microcapillaries, as diabetics suffer these consequences, that these capillaries start shutting down, their blood supply starts shutting down, and pretty soon you're cutting off limbs. So very, very simple to understand that the blood is life, and is this making nitric oxide, the fact that your body makes nitric oxide to keep the blood supply chain, all those tiny blood vessels open and clear, and so that they get the water to the end of the row, as it were. On the farm, my dad always said, get the water to the end of the row, otherwise the crops are going to die out there on the perimeter. Our bodies are the same way.
Stan,
as you say, it's very simple.
It's so amazing that you touched on those three things, because for me personally, I feel like I had that divine intervention with you and John, because I was having experiences where my blood pressure was tanking. I was feeling pressure, fluid around my heart. And at night, I would wake up and I would have a hard time catching my breath. Now, I wonder how many people on the call tonight were experiencing that in 2020. I imagine quite a few, right? I think many of us were having these symptoms, and your mind just starts racing. I could absolutely feel my body starting to everything was starting to kind of just slow down and shut down. And it was that divine intervention when you and John came with Cardio Miracle, the moment that I started taking, and that's another fun thing that's about this product. I remember I was traveling internationally towards the end of this last year, and at one point I didn't have Cardio Miracle, and for 2 weeks, right, I'm just thinking, man, I really feel a huge difference. And that's one of the big consistent comments that we hear for those that stop taking it for a week or two. My folks, the same thing. We have so many loved ones in our lives that when we start taking this product, we think, my goodness, my grandma needs to be on this, or my sister, or my cousin, or my daughter, or my kids, right? We start thinking about the different people that can benefit from this. But those specific three things that you mentioned, I think I experienced that firsthand and personally as a professional athlete. And that was a real big shocker for me. And to have something that addressed those three issues head on and just flip the switch completely, nighttime today was very powerful for me to experience.
Brad, let me just mention, when you think about the pathogen, you think about what we're dealing with over the last 18 months, what's the thing that comes to the forefront of almost every chronic case? Pulmonary or lung problems, pneumonia, inflammation in the lungs. Why is that? Why is that? Because oxygen is as essential as blood flow. And when oxygen is reduced, blood slows down, becomes sluggish. The inflammation sets in. If the lungs aren't being adequately lubricated and used, they start shutting down the lungs. One of your practitioners, another dear friend of ours, Lorianne Pung, whose husband's a dentist, and they've been Cardio Miracle users. Ian had been, used it sporadically. He used it, maybe a scoop a day, but then he'd miss a day or two here or there. But he's Polynesian. Now, you have a great affinity. Your grandfather was one of the great ambassadors to Polynesia back in the day, French Polynesia. Well, the leading people who are being affected by this pathogen, over 80% of the deaths over 60 years old are African-American, Native American, and Polynesians. Those are the ones because they have a genetic issue with their vitamin D and producing nitric oxide. For whatever reason, they're just deficient in being able to manage their nitric oxide. And so Ian is Polynesian, and all of a sudden we got a phone call and he was in the hospital, and his oxygen level, because you go in for pneumonia and the first thing they try to do is throw you into the COVID ward and everything else. His oxygen had dropped down in the mid 70s, and they were panicking. I mean, he's 60 years old-ish, and his wife, a great natural practitioner in a lot of things. And I said, give him 6 servings a day. 6 servings a day. Now, I can't make any medical claims, but all I can say is 3 days later, he was out of the hospital and his blood oxygen was 96 in 3 days. So if I connected dots, I'd say oxygen, nitric oxide, stimulating that is helpful. One of the things people often ask me is because there are hundreds of Dr. Brad followers who tried Cardio Miracle sometimes over the last 5 years, hundreds of them. Many of them probably stopped taking it. Some went to something they found online, or maybe they started taking arginine capsules from Swanson's or from GNC. What Professor Malinsky proved is that we extend nitric oxide safely for 24 hours, 36 hours. When you take beets, super beets, which have done the best job of marketing, you get a 2 to 4 hour expression of a secondary pathway of nitric oxide. Well, that's great. So if you took it every 2 or 3 hours all day long, you would probably be in better shape than if you didn't. Arginine capsules, inferior formulas that are maybe inexpensive on the internet. It's kind of like buying a cheap car that keeps breaking down on you. What's more important than your body? What's more important than your loved one's health?
So on this point, Brad, this is one of the things that Dr. Malinsky said, that John was a genius and he didn't know why. Like Malinsky knew why, but John had no idea why.
I think that's true.
Yeah, because, and some of the science, right, that John had solved a problem he wasn't aware of. That when our bodies produce nitric oxide, there's a molecule called the nitric oxide synthase, as you know, and it produces nitric oxide. And one of the inevitable consequences of nitric oxide production in our body is the production of the most destructive oxidative molecule in our biological system. That's a quote from Dr. Malinsky. The most destructive oxidative molecule in the human biological system is a natural byproduct of nitric oxide production. It's called peroxynitrite. Now, here's the other thing so Dr. Malinsky thought 24-hour expression, that's crazy, but it's happening. The other thing that he said that he found was absolutely crazy is that with such a high rate of nitric oxide production, he found that the production of this inevitable production of this oxidative molecule was reduced by like 50%. It's called peroxynitrite. he said the peroxynitrite production had plummeted relative to the high rate of nitric oxide production. So it was this ratio between these two molecules, the peroxynitrite, this terrible toxic molecule that destroys DNA in the cells, and this nitric oxide production on the high side, that ratio, he had never seen that ratio before, so healthfully identified. And so in his study here, he says that the Cardio Miracle Presents is a composite product. It basically has two lists of ingredients. There's a list of a part of our ingredient list that induces the body to produce nitric oxide. Then there's a whole other part of the list, dozens and dozens of ingredients, the fruits and vegetables and weird things like white pine tree bark, and beaver chips. I mean, other things, but that are these anti-inflammatories and antioxidants that scavenge these oxidative molecules that are the inevitable output of nitric oxide production. And nobody else in the nitric oxide world that's selling any kind of nitric oxide supplement is even talking about the destructive consequences of nitric oxide production in the body. So
that's why we have 50 ingredients, Brad, and that's why I've improved the formula about 5 times in the last 7 years since we met. And fortunately, it played out in the lab that it actually gave people all of the good and reduced even the bad that we didn't even know was a part of the equation at the time. So.
Yeah, it's been amazing to watch as you've gone through this process and added all of these different compounds and created this formula that has never existed before and that works so incredibly well. I mean, there's lots of nitric oxide out there. Yeah, you can go to any health food store, you can buy nitric oxide supplements. You can probably buy them at Walmart, but this is a completely different animal. And that's why I take it. And that's why I wanted to get you guys together and get the word out to the people that follow Discover Healing and the Emotion Code and the Body Code, because they need to know about this stuff, because especially now. Build
the immune system. Yeah, building the immune system is everything.
That's what it's all about. Absolutely right. All about circulation and so on. So let me see. I wanted to ask you, the Ohio State University study. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's actually Athens, Ohio. It's the University of Ohio. And Professor Malinsky was the former honoree of the Madame Curie Award, the outstanding scientist in Europe. I mean, he's so decorated. His house is full of trophies and honors from all over the world. I had heard about him in February of about 2017, I think it was, when he published a groundbreaking story or research on vitamin D and how critical vitamin D was to cardiovascular health. Well, guess what? How important is vitamin D to this pandemic? It's really important. Who talks about it? I mean, Dr. X one time said, "Oh yeah, I take vitamin D on the side." Well, of course he does. Vitamin D is critical. And my belief is that with our nitric oxide lasting 24 hours, it allows that vitamin D to be substantially more absorbable. So when people are taking their zinc, their magnesium, the different things they've heard about that are valuable for feeling better, the nitric oxide makes a huge impact. So I actually emailed Dr. Malinsky and told him that I felt I had a formula on nitric oxide that was groundbreaking. And 2 days later, I get a phone call from his PhD assistant who said, "We've reviewed several thousand emails and Dr. Malinsky wanted me to call you." And I go, "Well, that's interesting." So the next thing I knew, I was on the phone with him. And a week later, I was flying to Ohio to meet with him. He really an interesting character, the smartest person I'd almost ever met. And I asked him if he would cut us some slack and not charge us $500,000 like everyone else in the world that he does research for, and if he wanted to help humanity. And so he charged me less than that, but it was more than we could afford. And we essentially bet the farm. And he says, well, what if it doesn't work? And I said, I want to know. I'm not going to waste my time if it doesn't work. I want to have you test it. And 2 months later, he called me, he says, I'm astonished at the results. And then we published the paper about a year later. And it was great, because if the best thing that ever came from that study, it got Stanford Graham's attention to come and work with us. And whenever we take this to anyone who's really, really a scientist, and a lot of this stuff gets really technical, and I don't want to lose people's concentration on this, but if you have somebody who's really, really smart, who's really, really technical, who wants the proof in the pudding, to know exactly every ingredient in the pudding, give them the Malinsky study, and it'll blow their minds, because the conclusions were shocking from this professor who's published hundreds of papers and is world renowned in his expertise on the subject. But one of the things I really learned from him was how critical vitamin D3 is, and zinc. And see, we have zinc, we have selenium, we have the hawthorn berry, we have grapeseed extract, we have pycnogenol, the white pine bark that Stan was talking about, turmeric, astaxanthin. I mean, we have all these antioxidants and anti-inflammatories, which is what collectively works with our multiple nitric oxide stimulation ingredients to help make this successful. And that's why we're having such remarkable results in all of the different autoimmune symptoms and challenges and blood work that people have.
I want to make an observation, Dr. Nelson, before you hop in here, and that is, there's a common denominator that, Brad, that you and John share, that I'm thinking about listening to John and looking at you, and having spent time in your home with Gene, in really understanding the commitment that you've made. That you've made a lifetime commitment to discover what you've discovered, so that you can help and heal thousands and thousands of people. So John's over here. He'll get an honorary PhD from somebody, you know.
I think so.
but his source of information is God. Because, I mean, smart man, brilliant man, applies himself to an area of interest in which he is not a specialist, and applies himself relentlessly. And granted, you've got a medical background, but the emotion code, they don't teach that in medical school. I mean, they don't, who's teaching that, Brad? And so I think it's phenomenal that here we are sitting with two men who have brought, creative geniuses, and have blessed now my life, and because you've done work with me, Brian's life, my children's lives, my wife's life. I mean, and John has blessed my life, but isn't it interesting that some of the most critical discoveries come from those that aren't necessarily carrying the credentials, but the ones that are searching for the answers that really want to know for the right reason.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I remember reading a statement by somebody, I can't remember who it was, that said that no matter how much people might think that their discoveries and the things that they create are their own creations or their own discoveries, really there is one source of all the intelligence and all the discoveries and everything that's great that we come up with, and that's God, really, or higher power, source, however you want to refer to it.
Right.
So, yeah, it's true that that's the best place to go to get information. I mean, a lot of the great discoveries throughout history haven't really come from committees.
Yes, for sure.
It's the committees that design cars like the Yugo.
Or the Edsel. You think about it. Well, and Brad, both you and I have a huge patriotic leaning here. All you have to do is read the autobiography of George Washington. There wasn't a snowball's chance in hell that army should have beat the greatest army in the world. It was the will of deity that it happened. And that's why it's a shame today that we're allowing the evil designs of mankind, evil people in high places that are essentially feeding us misinformation in the name of profits, in the name of corporate value, as opposed to healing symptoms, healing lives, improving lives. And why isn't anyone talking about build your immune system other than the people who are viewed as wacky? When for years,
True.
for years, how did the world get by without all of this stuff?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You just don't hear much about that, do you?
You don't, and it's
at least in the mainstream.
So follow the money is what I say. Just follow the money, and you'll find the truth. But do yourself a favor and take care of your own immune system and let your body do its thing by feeding it the right fuel. And for a couple of bucks a day, you can probably help prevent most of the catastrophic things that are happening to a lot of people around us.
Yeah. No, we'll include the Malinsky study on the email that will go out to your
fantastic.
audience.
Yeah. Okay. So everybody will get that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good luck, everybody, plowing through that.
Just for, it's one of those insomnia prescriptions that I can make as a doctor of the law. So.
Well, so we do have some questions.
Great.
Liz asks, why are there so many ingredients in the product? There are.
Because every time I would talk to smart people, I would learn something new that I felt was important. It wasn't a kitchen sink type of attitude, but it was connecting the dots. And fortunately, from Professor Malinsky, now we could strip it down, but the reality is it works so amazingly well. And as your people may or may not know, we sell direct. I found the nitric oxide science in a multi-level company that helped turn my health around. We get calls every day, literally, from multi-level companies who would give anything to have this product, but they'd have to sell it for $8, $10 a serving instead of our $1.50, $2 a serving. So we put in the best of the best. We're no compromising. At some point, we might come down to an essentials product, but you know what? A person's better off taking a half a scoop twice a day if price becomes an object. We give people about 30% off if they get on our subscription program. We don't try to lock them in. We try to help them. We're trying to help them benefit themselves. So we give them a discount. We give them free shipping. We give them rewards points. You buy 6 or 8 of them in a period of time and you get another one free. And then we are introducing a sharing program where people can share with others and get further discounts. So we're all about saving the people money, but we will not compromise the integrity of the ingredients. In fact, we're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars starting this next month in having the most sophisticated ingredient review that money can buy in the world by a group of scientists that are going to be studying each interface between every one of the 53 ingredients and telling us the exact ratios that we should have. We're going to make that investment because that's how committed we are to having the best of the best. And wow. I would love to have him say, you don't need 2 or 3 of these, or you don't need as much of this or whatever. But I can tell you this, our commitment is to have something that works, for heaven's sakes, because I don't know if there's anything more important than your own heart or your body that I can think of right now. And so the last thing you want to skimp on is trying to stay alive and stay out of this, stay off a ventilator, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, and I appreciate that so much about you, John, that you're just like a bulldog. You've been so relentless with this over all of these years that I have known you. It's really just been an amazing thing to see. Now, Barbara has a question. Does nitric oxide in the product or the drink? Is it in the product or the drink? And what happens?
The ingredients stimulated. Yeah.
Yes.
The ingredients, arginine, citrulline, beetroot powder, we have that. That stimulates through your gut, through your intestinal system, or through your mouth. It stimulates in your bloodstream for your endothelial lining to create the nitric oxide that is naturally God-given from birth, but starts diminishing with the age process. So there's no such thing as a nitric oxide drink at this point in time. This stimulates, or it's a booster to allow the body to stimulate it safely and effectively on its own.
Right, creates its own. So let me ask you this, John. When is it? I mean, when you're 10 years old, you've got great 100% nitric oxide production going on in the body. When does it really start to taper off? How old are you when that happens, generally?
I think chronologically, it would probably be late 20s, early 30s. It starts tapering, but with the diet and, I think the sooner that people introduce bad food, bad environmental, chlorinated water, bad air that they're breathing, it can accelerate that because it's all part of that contamination of the fluids of the body that become acidic. And when it becomes acidic, that takes its toll on the lining of these microcapillaries. Okay. All right. Thank you. So I'm sure people are probably wondering, how do they get this? If they want to order some and try it out or get on the subscription, how do they do that? We have a special offer for our friends at the Emotion and Body Code. You can go to the link that's here on the chart, and you can save 10% on a 60 serve. You can save more, 15% on 2, or you can buy 3 and get the 4th one free, which is a great value. Takes the cost down to less than you'd pay for most bad soft drinks or things that you shouldn't be eating or drinking anyway. Right. Okay, great. So the link is in the.
Well, let's ask Joe to put the link. There it is. The link is in the chat.
Oh, the link's in the chat. Okay, good.
And then we'll also send it out in an email. So look for an email coming from you that will have the link to everybody that they can order because we want to help support all of the good work that you're doing. And the way we market is mouth to mouth, person to person, referral to referral, and centers of influence. To your listeners, I mean, Dr. Christian Northrup, G. Edward Griffin, Robert Scott Bell, Ty Bollinger, Meridian Magazine. I mean, we have lots of people who and every one of them are not paid to endorse this product. They participate in a modest way to help finance their missions, but that's only because they've all become converted to the product themselves and they have their own viable experience. I had a guy called the other day who owns one of the finest hamburger joints, several of them in the Salt Lake area. And he called me, he talked to my sister at a funeral, and he said, tell your brother thank you for turning my health around. Now, it was kind of shocking. So I called him on the phone, and he said, every one of his blood markers had improved, including his calcium score. Now, we can't claim that that's because of Cardio Miracle, but it's certainly not from the French fries and the onion rings that he serves at his restaurant. But he was so thrilled. And then another one is one of the founders of Nu Skin, Burke Roney. When he had his shoulder surgery last year, I met him and talked him into trying our product. He recovered in half the time. Another one, my friend Scott Palmer rebuilt his ankle. The surgeon's now taking credit, says the best recovery he's ever seen, half the time. Knee replacement. I mean, I could tell stories all day long about things, but would invite your followers. You can essentially go to DuckDuckGo, because we're avoiding the other ones some now because of their censorship, but they can go on their own search engine. You can put in any problem, any symptom, any disease, anything, and then plug in next to your Parkinson's or your MS or whatever, nitric oxide, and you'll always find a diminishing or low level of nitric oxide and a low level of vitamin D3. And the same thing with this pathogen, this virus, whatever, just put in nitric oxide and spike proteins, put in nitric oxide and autopsies, whatever, you'll be stunned. We have answers, and there's hope for people. That plus using the emotion code and the body code, and then using just some good old common sense, we can get through this crisis that we're seeing in our country and throughout the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said, John. Thank you. And, of course, those of you that are used to the emotion code, the body code, you can test yourself for Cardio Miracle. You can do it at a distance before you buy it. You can test yourself, see how many doses you're going to need. And that, because that was a question that had come in. Well, how much of this should I take? And ultimately, it's your body that's the judge of that. Your subconscious mind will tell you. So
you and I have tested dozens and dozens of people on stage.
Yep, we have.
Every time, we had a couple of people out in the hallway leaning, trying to learn the body code and learning the muscle testing. But whenever you tested them or Lana tested them or whatever, I don't think we've ever seen anyone in 5.5 years that their body wasn't saying that there was something of value in this formula for them.
Yeah. I agree with that. It's 10 out of 10, as I recall, that, but test it yourself and try it out yourself. And the reason why I wanted to get these guys together for you tonight and share this information with you is because this is something that has been really beneficial for me. It's been really beneficial for my wife, for our family members, and lots of other people. And of course, the stories that filter through about this supplement and how powerful it is. It's just something that we need, I think, especially in this day and age, especially now, with the spike protein and everything and the endothelium and how important that is. And so anyway, hopefully this has been entertaining for you guys and interesting for you. It's been a lot of fun for me to connect with you and with you panelists. It's great to see all of you again, and great to meet you, Brian, for the first time on the call here. So thank you for being on with us. And again, if you've got questions, you can. If people have questions, how do they get those answered?
I think you can go to.
They can email us. They can email us, Brad, at support@cardiomiracle.com.
Okay, perfect.
Support@cardiomiracle.com. That link is in that email address is in the chat as well. Folks, send us all your questions. You will get an answer. We will answer you.
Okay, and just in the interest of full disclosure, if you buy through the link that is our link with Discover Healing, then there is a percentage of that comes back to us to help us with our mission to get the emotion code and the body code out to the world. So
we're all about the mission of our friends and loved ones. And let me just add for the last time, our meeting, Dr. Brad and Jean, has been life-altering for my wife and I and our loved ones. And we can never repay them for the gift that they've been as friends, but also for this science. And so we're out to mutually benefit the missions of people who are trying to help heal the hearts of mankind and help save democracy and agency for all of those people who inhabit the earth who give a darn about liberty.
Thank you, John. I would echo that statement of yours right back at you. It's just been wonderful to know you, and Janet and Stan. We love you, and Susie too.
Thank you.
And so you guys are awesome, and I love you all, and I appreciate you, and all of you that are listening and watching the webinar. Our love goes out to you too. Thank you for all the great work that you're doing in the world. Light always overcomes darkness, and this work. The emotion code, the heart wall, the body code, a Cardio Miracle. It's all about healing us from the inside out so that we can do what we're supposed to be able to do in this life.
That's
and
right.
Bringing light into the world. Because there's a battle that's going on between light and dark. It's been going on forever, but it's kind of getting, it's kind of reaching a climax eventually, and it may reach that climax within our lifetimes. Who knows? But this is all about that light. So thank you all for being here and being from the light.
Thank you, Dr. Brad. You're so awesome. We love you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. You're awesome. I'm grateful to just work here.
We'll turn that music on so we can dance.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Here it is. Thanks, everybody.
Sounds like Alex. don't.